Before you begin this podcast, I want you to consider several things. First, I was joined by my dear friend Howard, my safe technology colleague, to co-host this particular interview as Andia could not make it. We had to let go of so many questions prepared and let this conversation go where it went. Jack was in flow, and I am so grateful he weaved the story he did to answer why we are experiencing unprecedented levels of cancer today, and specifically the fast-growing version named turbo cancer. It's a small thing, but Andia insisted I share that we did have the question prepared on why the 16-year-old rape case was so critical to Jack. But I hope after listening that you can appreciate that I did not want to waste airtime letting him know that. Second, I was prepared to embrace the suck of Jack schooling me in this podcast. I was speaking to the great white shark of decentralized medicine, and I was the baby seal in his waters. Jack cares deeply where humanity is headed with technology, including AI, and to say I respect him for that is an understatement. He took me out of my comfort zone and challenged me and every podcaster attempting to change the ether, to stop wasting the airtime on the superfluous. Offline, Jack asked me why I had not yet mentioned the mRNA platform publicly. Those two things really hit home, and I highlight them for every health podcaster listening. Thirdly, what I was not prepared for was the following 19 excruciating hours when I thought I might have lost the recording due to my initial nerves as podcast host without my right hand, Endia, handling the technical aspects. I spent those hours rereading my notes and agonizingly trying to recall every gem shared of this historic interview. All was not lost, and I celebrated like it was Christmas when the recording appeared the next morning. I should mention that there are 3 specific podcasts to listen to in addition to this one that will be included in the show notes that will really help you understand the subtle complexity of this particular podcast interview. And they are Danny Jones, Big Dharma, and Tetragrammatron with music producer Rick Rubin. It was an honor to have this interview. Jack was gracious with his time. He led us into a new understanding of the etiology of turbo cancer and by extension, cancer itself. But he did it in such a way that it will speak to many people in different ways than just quantum biology. In fact, he took us to the prime equation of regeneration. 30 million volts has to be reduced to 1/trillionth of 1 ampere in the inner mitochondrial membrane. For Jack, this is one of the most important contributions to the world made by the scientist Robert O. Becker, author of the seminal book, The Body Electric. In closing, the challenge becomes, how do you take what you know and begin to consider it with the understanding of these 2 brilliant scientists, Jack Kruse and Robert O. Becker? In fact, when you look at all the component pieces that Jack intertwines in this interview, especially when he begins with General Groves and the Manhattan Project and weaves a continuum to COVID and turbo cancer, you may be like Howard and I, both challenged and punched in the mouth. Jack used this expression, punched in the mouth, and it is his urgent call to action for humanity that is at a critical point for survival itself. The best thing any of us can do to honor the message here from Jack Kruse is to become a quantum savage. Now, enjoy this interview.
When it comes to light, we often think sunshine first, but it is equally important to honor the darkness. We talk a lot about avoiding artificial blue light at night on this podcast, and that means protecting ourselves from blue and green light after sunset. This sets us up for that melatonin release and quality restorative sleep. This is why Laura and I wear Viva Rays. Unlike typical blue blockers, they design glasses with circadian biology in mind. It is our go-to source for protecting our circadian rhythms. You can use the code QuantumHealthy for a discount. Link is in the show notes.
Okay, welcome everybody to Quantum Healthy. Today we have an epic guest coming all the way from El Salvador. Dr. Jack Kruse is a recently retired neurosurgeon, author of the Epi-Paleo Rx book. He's an educator and thought leader extraordinaire on health. He is a sought-after podcast interviewee because he challenges centralized medicine and brings decentralized insights on energy, epigenetics, mitochondrial health, and quantum biology, etc., and has many of us health practitioners questioning our day jobs. He is the OG of the leptin Rx prescription, the cold thermogenesis protocol, and he has been an advocate for avoiding artificial light, especially at night. and embracing the sun, nature, and becoming a mitochondriac. Welcome, Uncle Jack.
Thank you.
And again, thank you in advance for making the time today.
No
So,
problem.
Okay, today I'm primarily hoping you'll give us some insights on the cause of the increasing cancer rates, and of course, some ideas of how humanity can pivot to reduce these and help those that are currently afflicted. And then if we have some time, maybe some extra questions at the end. We're curious about your effect on El Salvador's future health as well. But first, I do have a co-host, Endia, who could not make it today for work issues. And she sends her regrets and best wishes. And I have found a stand-in, a colleague and friend of mine, Howard Bertram, who's here now. And he's a follower also of your work and a fan of decentralized medicine. So he just finished reading The Body Electric, Robert O. Becker's book that you quote and encourage us all to read. And he's had many insights, and it just seemed timely that this came up. And so I asked him if he could be here. So I kind of see the two of you as men that care deeply about where humanity is going, and just both of you are up at night. I think you both sleep well, but you're not wasting a moment of your day trying to guide us in the right direction. So welcome, Howard, and I'll let you maybe start off with the first question.
Well, okay, so I'll do an honest confession. Laura mentioned to watch the video you did recently with Cheryl Utall. It was fabulous, and actually I was up quite early this morning to see it the second time because I caught a fraction. So I thought I was going to lead in with, I read The Body Electric and that, but I'm going to do a twist because you said something in one of your videos months ago that sent me down one hell of a rabbit hole, and that was General Groves. So my question, coming back to Becker, how in the world did you overcome the compartmentalization of that knowledge? And I think that will take us anywhere we have to go.
Well, I mean, it's the single biggest issue that people, I think, who parse my work out don't realize. Me as a brain surgeon have to make a diagnosis. So the diagnosis that I made after coming up with the quilt document and starting to talk about, decentralized medicine and how it links to thermodynamics, sitting down with Becker was probably the single most important, I would say, event that happened to unfold all this. And he was the one that basically told me that you have to realize that General Groves and DARPA siloed silence so that all these different pieces couldn't communicate to one another. So the real reason I went to speak to Becker is, he did all this exquisite work and he never really found where the DC electric current was. Why? Because they took his lab away after he went on 60 Minutes. So when I went up and told him the story of POMC and told him exactly how, alpha MSH and melanin really work, we kind of chuckled about it. And he goes, I can't believe, it was that obvious. I missed it. And I made a joke to him at that time. I said, well, that's the difference between neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons. You guys are, bone and hammers and chisels, and neurosurgeons are a little bit more nuanced and deft of touch. And, if you remember reading the book, he said that the DC current comes right out underneath the myelin sheath, which is exactly where POMC is located, in neurons. So it's not like he didn't, target the place. He made things a lot easier for people like me to figure it out. But the key was to understand who he was siloed with at the same time. And that story, I have to tell you, every podcast, I would include my members in this too. They've done really poor jobs asking me questions. If you want to be quite frank about it, I think podcasters, they come in with an agenda, which is the wrong way to do a podcast. I think what you need to do is find out what you're going to talk about, where it takes you. And then you start to go, well, where is the cross-pollination and where did it come from? Well, it turned out Becker clued me in on Alan Fry's work. And he said, just so you know, Alan Fry was supported by DARPA, just like I was, but we weren't allowed to know what each other one was doing. And that to me was a really big realization. And Becker was the one that tied it back to General Grove's original idea with Oppenheimer to take all the different guys and compartmentalize them. And if you really go back and look at, the recent movie they did in Oppenheimer, they did a pretty good job, I think. But there's a couple of key things pointed out. Like, for example, why do we get nuclear weapons and why did we go the fission route? Why did we not go the thermonuclear route? And it turns out it's because of these silos. And when you realize the silos are actually what DARPA and the DoD are using to determine the trajectory of science, and then you actually sit down and read, I think, the most important book after Becker's book, which is Marino's book, Going Somewhere. He talks about how Becker's life was siloed and how it was sculpted and how he was forced to do different things. And even the other doctors that were involved in this story, I think it's really important for you to know, they also were part of the DARPA program. So, for example, in Becker's book, which you said you just read, you probably saw the famous talk, I believe it was in 73, with Andy Bassett and one of the other doctors. And what was the gist of that discussion? The gist of that discussion is Becker was worried about the use of electromagnetic pollution causing cancer, and the other two doctors thought that was, bullshit. And the interesting thing is both of those doctors also had DARPA patents. That's something that a lot of people don't know. So what you have to realize, who's magnified and who was censored by history? There's your answer. Becker was the one that was censored, but the other two doctors, you can actually see their technology at work today in every orthopedic and neurosurgeon's office. That's where bone growth stimulators come from. And the interesting thing is you have to ask yourself a question, because it scales now to Elon Musk. Okay, is this the utopian side of Becker's work at play? What's the dystopian part? Well, that's actually what Elon Musk is working on now. We see Neuralink out there, and he's using it on people that have neurologic injuries. And you have to ask yourself, why is the government allowing Elon Musk to do a lot of this stuff? Well, when you find out that people who have neurologic injuries have open blood-brain barriers and many times open gut barriers, whose science is that? That's Alan Fry's science. Oh, another DARPA researcher. So again, we're focused in on the utopian side of the science, but what's the dystopian side? The dystopian side is, can we use Neuralink and can we use Starlink in unison to couple to, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 billion people? Can we do it in countries? Can we turn it on or off? And if you know anything about Alan Fry's work, he's the one that worked out how directed energy weapons really work. So, for example, many people think that this thing that happened in 2008, 2009, when Obama was president in Cuba, the Havana syndrome, where people started to have these really unusual injuries, they think that this is like new science. Now there's a whole bunch of people out there on the internet called targeted individuals, who they think for some reason they're targeted, and they don't really understand that they're part of a randomized controlled clinical trial that the DoD and DARPA are running at scale by using, regular, straightforward stuff that we communicate with when we're talking about right now. And who's the person that defined the voice of, or I should say, the voice of skull technology? It's actually Alan Fry. The paper was written in the 1960s. And what did Becker write in many of his other books, and also Marino write? He talked to us in 1973 about the woodpecker frequency that came out of Ukraine that went all over. In fact, I remember she said, you were from Portland. It went right over Portland, the woodpecker frequency.
Oh, that's Andy is from Portland.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's kind of ironic that we're talking about this. But what else did Becker also talk about in his later books? He talked about what happened at the Moscow embassy in 1973. from 1960, I believe it was 65 through 73, the Russians pointed direct energy weapons at the US Embassy. 3 straight ambassadors came down with blood cancers.
Right.
Why is this important? It's important because of Becker's work. And then everybody in the embassy had a variety of different diseases that actually were linked to Alan Fry's paper. These people had tinnitus, they had cognitive haze, all the things that you hear about people today describing diseases that, you know, doctors tell you don't exist, like fibromyalgia or Meniere's disease. Many of the targeted people out there have the same diseases. Many of those diseases to this day, you sat down with doctors, they would say, well, I don't know if I believe in this diagnosis. And to my knowledge, right now, there's only one person in the United States that's actually been formally diagnosed by a neurologist with Havana syndrome. And this is a guy named Len Baer, who actually is a guy that's in the artificial intelligence biotechnology space. So it kind of tells you why he's been targeted as well. So when you hear all these points and it sounds crazy, then you go back and you read Becker and Marino's work and you find out, well, how did they end this Moscow embassy issue? The Department of Defense lined the entire embassy with tinfoil. So do you know where the idea of tinfoil hats came from? From that actual issue. So the same reason why we have the word conspiracy theory also simulated through the CIA, tinfoil hats comes the same way. But guess what? You can go back and read the Federal Register in 1973. Henry Kissinger had to give everybody hazard pay who was in the Moscow embassy from 65 to 73. And, you know, Becker talked about this. And then you realize at the same time in 1973 is when the US military hires Becker to do the work on the sanguine antenna in Wisconsin. Why? They want to find out, does low frequency RF have an effect on biology? Why? Because you don't realize what just happened from 65 to 73 because it was siloed. You don't realize how these things are together. And what's the utopian version from the US Navy? We need to be able to track our Trident submarines all over the world. So when everybody hears this, they're like, oh, this is no big deal. And then when Becker finds out that not only the microwaves cause the problems that Fry realized and the problems that are in the woodpecker frequency and the problems in the Moscow embassy, guess what? The same problems exist for RF. So when you know that the extreme low frequency bands also have biologic effects, this opens up the can of worms. Well, everybody knows from X-rays on, it's a huge problem because of ionization. But we just went to the low scale. We have the microwave evidence from Alan Fry. If you take a 1,000-foot view seat, you begin to see that the U.S. military believes and finds out that they can weaponize the entire electromagnetic spectrum. That's really what DARPA has been doing for a long period of time. And then, of course, my 1977 moment to bring all this out is in the Danny Jones podcast done on December 2nd, 2024, where I sit down and tell people, I said, look, you want to know how this started? Started with General Groves. It started with finding that surgeon on the Brooklyn docks with the mob and knowing that they were working on utilizing psychedelics. The psychedelics eventually morphed into blue light, and that's where the mob gets dragged in with Mo Dalitz and Meyer Lansky. Why? Because when they take over the casinos in Vegas, what do? They get rid of the clocks, they paint the windows black, and they bring in the one-armed bandits with all blue light. And magically, guess what happens? All of a sudden, MK Ultra shifts its focus from drugs to light. Guess what? This happens in the 1950s before Alan Fry and Becker. So when you look at this historical perspective and you realize how this shift went, you actually are recapitulating by taking the siloed science and creating a historical timeline of the RICO crime that's really going on. Right. That's really what the story truly is. And the problem is Becker wasn't even trying to put this whole thing together. He was just trying to talk about his specific issues because he couldn't believe that people would not be interested in the things that he found. And remember, the reason why this was a problem, Alan Fry was never nominated for the Nobel Prize, but Robert Becker was, and Robert Becker was the most famous DARPA scientist of his time. He published in the greatest journals of the day. Like when I tell you, a researcher today would love to have a 15-year window that Becker had in the 50s and 60s and 70s. To this day, it's unparalleled what he did. And to think, here we are 50 years after this event, and to think about where we are, and then realize that most of the people that you guys are probably training or talking to, they still don't have a cogent story of actually how all this fits and then how it plugs in to the modern current events. Because when you begin to realize, hey, the story of, mandates and government mandates and shots for a bioweapon that was, leaked out of a Wuhan lab, actually the solution is a DoD device. Just remember, Big Pharma, and we all like to blame Big Pharma. Big Pharma didn't create the vaccine, just so we're all clear. DARPA and the DoD gave a lot of the head starts to all these companies. And who was the distributor of the jab? The Department of Defense. People don't realize that. And I always tell people in this story that Big Pharma really are the drug dealers, but the Colombian drug cartel of the messenger RNA platform is actually the Department of Defense and DARPA. And the reason why this is important is brought out in your first question, that you need to know the history of really what predates all this to truly understand what's going on now. Now, I know that most people are like, look, I don't really care about the history. Just tell me what we need to do to people that have this problem. Well, here's my perspective that you may or may not like. And I really don't care which place you fall on. I think if you don't know the history, you're always apt to make huge mistakes because you don't understand how you should attack the problem. And it means many of the things that you'll accept as good treatments are not good treatments because you don't know actually the seminal work that was done to create the bioweapon. So what do you effectively have to do? You have to re-engineer, or I should say reverse engineer, the bioweapon program, which is kind of what I've been doing, I would say, for the last 2 years. It started on the Rick Rubin Huberman podcast. Why? Because why was I recalcitrant to go on that podcast for Rick? Not because Rick's not a friend and he's not a good guy. Rick's not the problem. Huberman's the problem. Why? He works at Stanford Research Institute, where a lot of this MK Ultra work got transferred once MK Ultra was shut down. And I also happened to know before I went that his father is a condensed matter physicist. So my concern was, how much did he know about melanin? And then what was my other concern? I didn't know if he was a DARPA scientist or not. I had pretty strong inclinations that he was, but I do know that Stanford has lots of DARPA connections. Okay. So then when you know that the key animal that Andrew Huberman studies is a cephalopod, and cephalopods, when actually you walk into Huberman's office, he's got all the cephalopods in a tank. So you can see the lights going off in their head. I thought it was kind of unusual that he would pick an animal to study that basically has neural networks that have no melanin in it. And his father's a condensed matter physicist. From my spidey senses with knowing what I know from Marino and Becker, I thought both of them were part of the program, which is why I didn't go talk to them for 6 weeks. Because I knew where this was going to end. And if you look at the last 2 years since that podcast come out, it in fact has ended exactly where I thought.
Is that like crickets? Like you haven't heard from him, right?
Oh, no, no. I mean, I'm not talking about him. He's a small
Okay.
potato in the story.
Okay.
I knew it was going to be crickets because I knew where the story was going to go. There's absolutely no way Stanford, DARPA, the DoD are going to want him to have me on the podcast. Why? Because they were concerned that all the pieces would be put together and then it would be pointed right back at them. So if you listen very carefully to what I talked to Becker about, he said, Jack, be very careful about how you do this. So what did I do? I decided to do exactly to DARPA what DARPA does to everybody else. I started to put bits and pieces of the story everywhere so that no one could shut it down. Then when everything was out, then people could put it together themselves and go, wow. Then you would know truly the scale, truly how nefarious, and truly that this is a RICO case at its fundamental core, and it's tied to money and science. And when you understand that the base case of it really is fiat money and control and power, and then you understand that big pharma sits at the right hand of the Cantillon effect. Remember, they're doing the bidding of the master. Who else is below the level of pharma? Well, it's obvious. It's the media, because the media controls the narrative for the DoD and also for pharma. This is the reason why when they changed the rules for advertising on TV, I knew right away what it meant. That was something that happened in the Obama administration. The same thing happened when they made the decision to get off the incandescent bulbs to go to LEDs. They gave you the story, the utopian story. It's to save energy. No, it was to eliminate UV and IR light. Why? Because the thing that you really invited me on this podcast for is, what is the wiring diagram that explains all this? Like, what is the base case for this whole story? That's the story that is difficult to understand. And DARPA is banking that you're all a bunch of retards and yet you'll never put it together. Why? Because you do have to know physics. You do have to know biology. You do have to know different parts of physics and biology. It's not an easy story to put it together, but when you do understand all those things and you put them together and you put it together for an audience so they can see the totality of it, you begin to go, wow, this is some kind of plan. And that's the reason why this plan has taken 75 years to materialize. But now they believe they have ultimate control over, at least in the United States, 360 million people. And in the world, probably 6 to 8 billion people. Certain countries, it's worse than that. For example, the country you live in is actually in a worse shape than the United States. Canada is really in trouble. And I would say to your guest, he happens to live in a state and a city that doesn't even realize why their politics and their thinking is what it is. It goes all the way back to the woodpecker frequency. They have all been preconditioned. They have all been targeted. The entire West Coast, the entire top of the United States was affected by this science. This was a giant test. And the craziest part is the Russians actually were doing this to warn people. And what did DARPA do? They said, well, let's take this shit show and use it to our advantage. And that's exactly what they did.
Oh, the Russians, meaning that back to the Havana syndrome?
No, the Russians with the woodpecker frequency, it started out of Ukraine. And that frequency climbed right over the same latitude that Portland was. And when the United States understood what the Russians were doing, the Russians were doing this to try to tell us what you're about to do to bring technology to your economy is probably not a good thing to do. Remember, they had all the same technology that we had out of the World War II. They developed everything up into thermonuclear weapons. But Have you ever stopped and asked yourself the one simple question in this whole story? Why don't they have Google? Why don't they have Apple? Why don't they have a big cell phone company? Why? Because it turned out the Russian government, who everybody thinks is bad, said, we're not going to do this to our people, because if we do this, we are actually going to change the trajectory. Communists already think they have control of their people through their active governance. United States decided we're going to use the electromagnetic spectrum to create something that's even better than communism, to turn people who think they're free into economic slaves. That's exactly what they've done.
Here, I was just going to ask you about a very light topic called cancer. And this is where we went. Holy smokes.
I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say it's where we went. It's the first question he asked.
Yeah, no, it's true.
That question wasn't linked to it, but the interesting thing is what I just said to you is directly linked to why people are getting turbo cancers now. Why? Because of the weapon. So when you make this jump, you think it's a quantum leap, but it's actually not. This is where you have to know all the work of Doug Wallace. You have to know the work of Becker.
Yeah.
You have to know the work of Nora-Volkow. You have to know Nora-Volkow's history and where she comes from. In my meeting with Becker, he warned me about Nora-Volkow. He said, do you know anything about this lady in 2006 who took over the National Institute for Drug Abuse? I said, no, I don't. He told me she's Trotsky's granddaughter. He says, you better watch out for her. I think she's a problem. And it turned out he was pretty smart to tell me that. What did she eventually go on to do? She presented the most seminal paper in 2011 that actually gets to your question. When you put a cell phone up to the side of your head, what does it do? It releases blood glucose and insulin. Guess who is the first person to tell DARPA that? Alan Fry. Who was the second one? Russ Addy. Who was the third one? Dr. Becker. Dr. Becker did that study in Pensacola on the pilots that were down there. And he found out that the blue light and the non-native EMF from the avionics arrays were raising their blood sugar and raising their triglycerides irrespective of their diet. But Becker had no way to know what everybody else had found, because remember, he was focused on regeneration research. But DARPA focused all on this and then put it to the side. So eventually in 06 to 011, we find out that Volkow understands completely how this process works. Why? Remember who she works for. The National Institute for Drug Abuse. Why is this important to DARPA? Because they figured out if they could stop the biology of beta endorphin and menencephalin, that starting a drug war in the United States would be really beneficial to their plan. Why? Because you're addicted to be in nature, in sunlight. So if you can uncouple somebody from that, then you give them fake opiates, and then you become much more programmable to the MK Ultra program. That is actually how this all fit together. So if you understand where most drug abuse comes from, it's in people that live at night with artificial light, blue lit. What does that effectively do? Here's where the mitochondrial story comes in. So this is what you need to know. The antenna on either side of the key is NAD, NADH, and over here is oxygen. In between my two fingers is the rest of the intermitochondrial membrane. 20 years ago, Nick Lane wrote a book called Power, Sex, and Suicide, and he said, where my thumbs are carries a 30 million volt charge. It's hard to believe, but the reason why the physics makes sense is that intermitochondrial membrane is only 6 angstroms big. So when the scale in electromagnetism shrinks, the power goes up. So that's the reason why it's got that charge. So you need to know that. So what does that mean? It means that that has the same power that's in a bolt of lightning. So when you're a neurosurgeon and you're trying to put this all together, you ask the very simple third grade question. What did nature do to confine a 30 million volt current? And the answer is staring all of us in the face, but most of you have still no clue how nature did it. That's called cytochrome C oxidase. It makes water, and it makes a very specific kind of water called deuterium depleted water that has no ions in it. It is completely pure water. That means it doesn't conduct electricity. Okay. It's a perfect insulator. So guess what happens? Then you need to ask the second question. What do you know about cytochrome C oxidase? It's a heme-based protein. What does blue light effectively do from the MK Ultra program? Blue light hits melanopsin. Anytime light hits an opsin, vitamin A comes off. What does vitamin A do? Vitamin A is liberated and it blows up anything made out of heme. Anything. So guess what? The liberated vitamin A is what destroys the cytochrome C oxidase. Then what effectively happens in the cell? The 30 million volt charge gets to leak out to go wherever it's allowed to go to, where the connection is, whether that be a circulatory pathway, could it be a neural pathway, could it be anything? And what's the distal effect? It causes a brownout. It blows cells out. Why? Here's what you have to think about. Common sense. If you had a house and you bought it in the 1920s and you hooked it up to the modern power grid and you decided to put a coffee maker in there, what do you think would happen? The house burns down. Got it? Mm-hmm. So effectively, what did MK Ultra, SRI, and the Brain Health Initiative realize through their 75 years worth of work? We can cause distant TBIs in people, and we can do it with very low frequency light in the visible spectrum. So what did they start doing? They started testing every part of the spectrum. What else could we do with this technology? And then they found out the key part. They found out, this is the part that really worried me about Huberman and his dad. If you know anything about what's going on in space medicine now and the ISS, they are now hiring, DARPA's hiring condensed matter physicists to figure out how to put melanin in the ISS and everywhere in the space program. Why? Because when melanin is dehydrated, meaning dry, it's the best electrical conductor that you can imagine. We have no better semiconductor on Earth than melanin that's dry. Guess what happens when you hydrate melanin with deuterium depleted water? It destroys the electric conductance. So now you do a hard stop. So our friend from Portland who just read the Electric Bodies book, what did he hear that was critical that he probably glossed over, but I guarantee he's going to go back and read now? Becker found that 1/1,000,000th of 1 ampere turned a red blood cell into a pluripotential cell that healed bone. 1/1,000,000th of 1 ampere. And I just told you there's 30 million volts on that inner mitochondrial membrane. It turns out that what nature is really doing is that she's using melanin to conduct but dampen the electric current to such a small current that drives regeneration. Now, we know the process from Becker in bone. So the question should come up to you now that you're beginning to see the pieces fit together. Well, do we use the same process for red blood cells to heal every other part of our body? And the answer is no. Why? In the science that's been developed in the last 40 years, we know that we have stem cell depots. Most of you know that. What most of you don't know is, do you know what chemical controls the stem cell depots? Nitric oxide. How do you like that? And what makes nitric oxide? UVA light, the same light that makes melanin. Isn't that a shocker? And here's the best part. What creates nitric oxide in the body? Nitric oxide synthetase. It's a heme-based enzyme. So that gets destroyed also by this process. So what DARPA figured out is they can uncouple regeneration by using blue light. In other words, you'll never be able to heal. So the key is get rid of UV and IR light. So do you want to know why Obama and Biden got rid of the incandescent bulb? Now you're beginning to see the plan. Now you're beginning to understand just how fucking nefarious these people are. So is there another way besides light that you can do that? Circa, let's say 2020, you create a bioweapon, a virus that also will have an effect on this. Remember, one of the key things that everybody talked about in the beginning of COVID, when you get this respiratory virus, what's the key feature? You lose your ability to taste and smell. What does that tell you? When it goes in there, it unwires the covering of the melanocytes in the olfactory bulb, okay? Does the same thing in taste, which is controlled by a couple of cranial nerves. So that's how they actually know that the mechanism is working. And what happens when that occurs? You get distal things. What's the number one distal thing that the olfactory bulb connects to? The limbic system, which is why people start to have mental problems, which is why cognitive ability is altered. Why? The olfactory nerve in mammals and reptiles ties to the oldest part of cortex that we have. That's different cortex than neocortex. That's 3-level. 3-layer cortex is very easily damaged. So DARPA has figured all this out as well. So you fast forward and you see in the bioweapon solution created by Dr. Fauci and Barrick at North Carolina, what's the most interesting part? They have a liquid nanoparticle that surrounds the spike protein. Guess what that does? It allows it to get through the blood-brain barrier. It allows it to get to where the mitochondria are. And what does it do? It also destroys things between NAD and here. So it has the same effect. So now you have a double whammy. So here's the most important part, because don't think I didn't forget about your question with cancer. You have this problem here, and this is broken, and the current is leaking out everywhere, right? But oxygen, look at my finger. Stop writing.
Okay.
Look, this finger here, oxygen is electronegative. It's the second most electronegative atom on the periodic table. That means it pulls huge amounts of electrons. This is broken. The current's out. That means the spike of ROS and RNS is through the roof.
Ooh.
That stimulates pro-growth. It also does something else. It shifts you to a Warburg metabolism.
Awesome.
That's the work of Norovolcal. So now they force you into a redox shift to raise blood glucose and insulin while causing this problem. That's a pro-growth signal. That is the reason why everybody is getting cancers.
We're seeing that. Just my own small practice. I've got,
You don't have to worry about your practice.
yeah,
It's happening at scale. We
scale.
already know this. This is
Around
no
the world,
longer a
right?
mystery. Everywhere.
Yeah.
And the worst part, this is not just a story about the Pfizer jabs that have SV40. Those people have an elevated risk because they have another problem that they learned about in the Cutter event. But
Can
every
you explain
jab,
that?
well, not yet, because it's
Okay.
not.
Okay.
We're not finished with this story. The LMPs are in every single jab. Not only that, here's the bad news. Almost every single jab created since 1986 has some of this technology in it. So guess what? They've been testing this on children. Why would they do this on children through the vaccine schedule? What do you know about children that's very similar to what I told you about Elon Musk people? They have no myelin. They're much more sensitive to electromagnetic radiation. Guess what else? You can easily open their blood-brain barrier and their gut barrier, which is whose work? Alan Fry. So guess what? You get to test this while nobody knows what you're doing for 50 years to find out what's the best way to do this. And what did they find out? This is the most amazing part of the story. So do you remember in the Navy Yards in Virginia a couple of years ago, about 10 years ago, a guy went in there with ELF carved into his rifle and he killed 12 people. And he targeted the people specifically because he thought that they were using directed energy weapons to get in his head. Turns out that guy's lost to history. But what did the military learn that time? The more melanated you are, the more resistant you are to the program. Got it?
Nice.
Then what happens? During Obama's reign, a guy who's 32-year-old lawyer goes with a gun in Florida State and shoots his library up where he was a student. Doesn't kill anybody, but he's also African American. What magically happens after that? SRI program gets moved to the Brain Health Initiative. You know where that's located? Central and South America. Do you know why? That's where brown and black people live. And guess what happens? The same program then is run. How do we overcome this problem? And the key problem is dehydrate their melanin sheets, and the melanin doesn't matter. In other words, they found the solution to the program.
Oh boy. Right.
Beginning to make some sense now?
It
Mhm.
sure is. And what's the easiest way to dehydrate that melanin?
Well, non-native EMF.
Non-native
I thought
EMFs.
you were paying attention.
No, Jack, that's why I wanted to hear it from your mouth, but that's
Very
obvious, right?
simple. I mean, everybody experiences it every time. If you want to know why Carrie Fisher died the way she did now,
Oh,
remember something.
Star
When
Wars.
she's in the plane, there's 250 idiots on the plane with her using Wi-Fi in a metal tube. So the other day when you saw Bobby Kennedy on the plane putting all that methylene blue in his drink,
Mhm.
what does that tell you? Bobby Kennedy knows about this program as well. So is he on our team or is he not? Got it?
Or is he just trying to survive?
Oh, I mean, that's the question that's going to crop up probably in the next 4 or 5 years. But you already seen the things that are done. Maha is haha. Why? They're not touching the messenger RNA platform. Now you're beginning to see why. Look what happened to Dan Weldon yesterday. The guy that actually figured big parts of this out just got asked to pull his nomination for the CDC. What did he do walking out the door? Go read the paper that he released on X to everybody. He basically told the world through when he was a congressman in the United States, back when Andrew Wakefield was around, that the papers got pulled not because they weren't true. It's because the people in pharma, the people that were linked to big pharma and media, had them pulled. That's the reason why they blocked his nomination. So even though they blocked it, the truth is now out about really what happened. That the findings of those papers, in other words, Wakefield's work, was reproduced and it was true, but they didn't want it out. Why? That's as close as this program has ever gotten to getting outed. And they have everybody believe since 1991 that Andrew Wakefield is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out he's not crazy. All of you are. You have bought the whole story, hook, line, and sinker. And do you know why? Because of my friend in Portland. He asked a good question. He started in a place where he didn't think we were going to go. But the entire story comes from that. When you understand how this is all linked, the reason I have a huge problem with food gurus, they, like a guy like Tom Siegfried, is out there telling the world that a Warburg metabolism is totally tied to food choices. That is absolutely 100% bullshit. And how do we know that? We know that because of Mo Dalitz. We know that because of Meyer Lansky. We know that because of Alan Fry and Nora Volkow's work. When anybody's blue lit, because melanopsin is the dominant opsin in humans, it's now present in our fat, our skin, our blood vessels, and our brain. We know that definitively. What does that tell you? Light shifts your metabolism, and it forces it away from the TCA cycle to how we used to use it when we were simple. 650 million years ago, before the Cambrian explosion, the first two domains of life, bacteria and archaea, guess what? That's what they used. They used a Warburg metabolism. So anytime you get shifted back to a Warburg metabolism, it tells you that complex life is not possible, which explains all the symptoms tied to long COVID. When you have an energy hog in your head, how could it possibly work when you're feeding it shitty glucose to make shitty ATP? In other words, you're built as a Ferrari, but you're asked to run on shitty gas. That's the story. So the interesting thing is, When you put this together, Lynn Margulis, who used to be a cosmologist wife, who came up with the idea of endosymbiosis, what she never realized is the story that I told you about the intermitochondrial membrane. How did archaea and bacteria join together after the great oxygenation event? Photobioelectric power joined those two cells together to create a mitochondria in eukaryotes. That is the first cancer on the planet. Oh, so you're starting to understand that cancer isn't even what you thought. In other words, when bacteria and archaea were forced to fuse because oxygen was toxic to both of them, they decided to join forces. And what was the power they used? Was the amount of electric current that was present between both of them to do it. And they both used initially the Warburg metabolism. What eventually comes up in complex life? The TCA cycle. And they're able to use the TCA cycle. Why? Because they innovated mitochondria. That's the key. Because what happens? Where's the TCA cycle? It's inside of mitochondria. Now, here's a hard stop again. Do you remember the story I told you about heme protein, cytochrome C oxidase? What did I tell my friend from Portland about Becker's work? The red blood cells filled with what? Hemoglobin, right? What's the third one? Nitric oxide synthetase that controls your stem cells, made from another heme protein. Where's the first step of heme metabolism in humans? Mitochondria. So if you get rid of the deuterium depleted water at cytochrome C oxidase, you can never make the heme you need to regenerate. Got it now? Because that's the full story.
Which affects all disease, right?
Which is why Uncle Jack has been saying what for 20 years? Blue light is the source of every chronic epidemic on this planet. And none of you know it. Why? Because none of you decided to go outside your silos. But guess what? Uncle Jack did. And who's the one that taught me that? Robert O. Becker.
Jack, you've got a quote you use often in your blog articles that I love. It looks like Vegas in the background. Do you want to share it, or do you want me to read it? About humans?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Okay, humans are the only species bright enough to make artificial light and stupid enough to live under it.
Actually, that wasn't Vegas. You know where that was?
No.
At a place where in in Central America, where the Brain Health Initiative was being tested.
Oh.
How do you like that?
How do you like that? The other one is that I love is your mother nature is entirely intolerant to any light she did not create.
Correct. And that's another story that people don't understand. When you really parse out this goes to Turing's data and also really Claude Shannon in 1948. For a message to be precise and resonate, it has to be rare or unusual. That's basically what the 1948 paper says. Basically, that's been used in Silicon Valley ever since in computing. What people don't realize is blue light in nature is rare. The color blue is rare. Why is it rare? Because it's important. That's what we use for circadian signaling. It's also what we use at the habenular nucleus that goes to our frontal lobes. So guess what? Now you begin to understand why humans are so susceptible to mental disease, because this blue light pathway, when it's broken by either the jab or by the use of technology, that electric current goes right up into your frontal lobes. That's let to run free. That's the cause of all of the mental illnesses. Like I always tell my friends, read Rick Rubin's book. You read it and you'll realize that it's a really nice Library of Alexandria of exactly the conditions that's present in human frontal lobes, from schizophrenia to depression. And people don't realize that those are things tied to dopamine, because when that current runs free, it destroys the amount of dopamine and melatonin you make. So for example, what is depression? What is bipolar disorder? It's a disease that's associated with low dopamine state. So that means duration signal intensity is altered. Schizophrenia, on the other hand, is high dopamine with a chaotic state. So what you need to realize, they're just what I described to you is basically TBIs, but of different types. in terms of, the thermodynamics associated with them. But that is the key to understanding. When you understand that all disease, as Doug Wallace has said literally for 50 years,
Right.
that if you lower the heteroplasmy rate, and it turns out this electric current run free is what raises the heteroplasmy rate. If you fix that, you can make the diseases go away. So that means diabetes can go away, ALS can go away. Every disease out there can go away. But why can't it go away? Because DARPA will never let centralized scientists ever figure this out. Because if you do, you're going to find out exactly how they're controlling you better than Putin does to his people.
In your blogs, it really seems like you've been addressing all these different chronic diseases and trying to give hope, as just empowering people, right, with this knowledge.
It's hard to give people hope who can't think. That's the problem. So guess what? You need to understand clearly what I'm saying. Okay? And I'll tell you something else. This may come off harsh, but it's very required. I want you to go current blog that's out. I think it's Decentralized Medicine 37.
37.
In the hyperlink to the case that I talk about. The single most important case I've ever done in my life was a story of a 16-year-old girl who had her head crushed by a brass lamp by a guy that was trying to rape her. Why is this important? Her TBI happened huge intensity, very acute time. Your TBIs have all happened over 50 years, low duration. You have exactly the same problem as that little girl, and none of you know it. And none of you have asked me a question about that. Not one of you. And how many podcasts I've done? Not one. So when you want to know why Uncle Jack is salty, now you realize it's actually a pun intended. Okay? Because what was the key to fixing her? Salting her central nervous system while using methylene blue at the same time. Now you begin to understand what effectively methylene blue really does. It's electrical tape when the water is not there. What do I call methylene blue light? Vitamin C. You'll be shocked to find out the guy who wins the Nobel Prize for vitamin C also did a lot of work with Albert St. George, that's Linus Pauling, on methylene blue. Why? They knew it was important. They just never figured out exactly how. And guess what? I'm telling you what the issue is. It increases the electrical resistance of the inner mitochondrial membrane to contain the 30 million volts. That's the key. That's exactly what chlorophyll does in plants. It's what hemoglobin does in us. It's what melanin does in us. When light hits it, takes light's power and then changes it into solitons and photons. That's what the ultra-weak biophotons from Fritz Pop are all about. That's the reason why the light that a mitochondria make is a signal to everything else. The problem is when that light signal is gone because your power grid is wide open between NAD and oxygen, it's a problem. And anybody who has a Warburg shifted metabolism, here's the ultimate irony. Oxygen is a toxin for you.
That's right.
It's a bad thing. And this is the reason why humans get tinnitus, Meniere's disease. It's the reason why they get cataracts. It's the reason why they get sleep apnea. Why? The neural networks of the brain are trying to protect them from blue light and non-native EMF. Why? Because the oxygen is drawing this electric current and you're self-electrocuting not only yourself, but the rest of the circuits that are tied to this neural network. That's how much wisdom is in our organism. We're incredible, but you need to understand the quantum level. You need to understand the wiring diagram of the mitochondria, which none of you do. None of you do.
Mm-hmm.
And
I actually want to, sorry.
I was going to say, when you think about this and you think about some of the recommendations you make for people, now you understand why I come out and say the things I say.
In the blog, this whole series, Decentralized Medicine, is so good. But this latest one, you talked about how treating COVID patients and cancers, we actually should be treating them as if they have an oxygen allergy.
Correct. You know the reason why? Because everybody who's got a post-COVID injury effectively is running a Warburg metabolism in certain places. So you would think, you know, like I'll give you an example because I haven't pounded on him too much in podcasts, but you know, Siegfried has gone around telling everybody that Warburg is a pathologic shift. It's not. You know how you can know this? I asked a simple question when I was a neurosurgery resident. If Warburg found this in 1924, is there any part of the human body that runs a Warburg metabolism naturally? And guess what I found the answer was? The human retina does at the fovea. So guess what? If it runs it at the fovea, that tells you it's not pathologic, doesn't it? Because we don't have a bunch of people running around with fovea cancer, do we? So that tells you right there that anything that comes out of Siegfried's mouth from here on in, he doesn't know the whole part of the story. You guys in this podcast know way more of it. So then you got to ask yourself, what is it unique about the fovea that makes it run the way it does? There's no melanin in the fovea. Oh.
It all comes down to melanin.
It always will, because it's a mammalian story. You didn't listen very well to the Huberman podcast. So guess what I'm trying to explain to you? When Uncle Jack says something, you better really listen to what I'm saying, because it turns out that the details really matter. So the Becker book, I can't tell you how many people I have turned on to that book. And do you know what? Nobody's has asked me until the podcast that really shook him, that he said he listened to twice. What did I focus in on? 1/1,000,000th of 1 ampere in a red blood cell. And nobody has ever asked that question. The sad part is Becker didn't even ask that question. He was like, I can't believe it, but that's what I found. And he even talks about all the crazy researchers who changed the electrodes to different metals. He's like, no, we have to use a specific one. And what was his greatest discovery that really nobody talks about? He took a child whose finger was amputated. See where I am now? He was able to regenerate the fingertip, and all he did was change his electrode to silver iodide. Why? Because he realized if he used silver, it would create more electrons, so maybe that could work. He was able to recapitulate the entire finger of a mammal. Let's be clear here, a mammal in 2.5 months. So you know what that means? This program is universal in all complex life. It spans amphibians, it spans reptiles, and it's in humans. Guess what? That's actually what they really paid Becker to do. That information DARPA has buried from everybody. Why? Because if you know that you can replace a fingertip, that means that there's an answer for their COVID jab. There's an answer for their cancer spike. There's an answer for their control program. Got it? That's the real story that Becker taught us. But none of you want to put it together. You stay siloed in what you believe. You keep believing the bullshit that food matters. It doesn't matter at all. What matters is the photobioelectric currents and how they operate cells. And when you begin to realize that it's all solid state physics, it's all semiconduction, it's all dopants, it's all how light is created, the fidelity of that signal is all that matters.
Is the problem that people are scared of physics? They just
I don't know what the problem is. I mean, I wasn't scared of physics. I was fascinated by Becker's work when I first got turned on to it, because I was given the topic of talking about bone regeneration to a bunch of our residents. I couldn't believe it. I remember the first time I told, the other group of neurosurgery residents that I was the boss of, I said, bro, you guys are not going to believe what I'm going to tell you, because it's not anything we learned in medical school. And that's what people couldn't fathom. And my mentor, my neurosurgery mentor, Dr. Klein, was there. And he goes, yeah, he goes, I remember reading that back in the 60s. And he goes, I thought the guy was crazy. And he goes, I talked to him because Dr. Klein was the most famous peripheral nerve surgeon in the world. He's like, look, I work on nerves, and this guy found that this current is right below the myelin layer. That's what Dr. Klein's interest was in this case. And he said to me, he goes, Jack, I still don't know what he found and how it works. He goes, but I'm fascinated by this because I know there's something in his work that actually could help my work. He goes, so that's why I want you to do this. He goes, maybe you'll figure it out. Well, I kind of did. It was melanin, a neuroectodermal derived protein that is very, very special between us and primates. And melanin is the key difference between us and them. We have the same number of genes. We have the same number of, what do you call it? Epigenetic programs. But the thing that's very different, melanin is on a different chromosome, and then that chromosome jumped to our different chromosome, and the way it's translated is radically different. And it turns out that that's what sculpted every single difference between us and them. And that's the reason why there's no missing links between primates and humans. There would never be one when you understand truly how melanin works, because it changed the photobioelectric currents, was able to change things so radically fast, very similar to what happened between archaea and bacteria, because the amount of electric current that was used to do this was off the chain.
So what's the answer to all this chronic disease and cancer? Is it,
Turn off the
is it
internet.
anything you've, I was gonna say,
Carrington event. Carrington event. That's what we need. Go
We
look
need
it up.
a what?
1859. Carrington event.
Oh, is that about the electricity?
Yeah, that's
In
when a CME from the sun hits the earth.
Yeah.
And that takes care of all of the Department of Defense's little tools. And that's the same effect that you get when you go camping in a place. And if you go back and listen to the guy that that's the only person that I know of in the United States who's been diagnosed with Havana syndrome, what's the number one place they sent them to? To Greenbrier, West Virginia. Why?
Right.
Because there's no EMF there.
Right. Yeah.
And it turned out when he went there, all the stuff that DARPA was targeting him went away. That's it. If you understand how the process works, how it's wired, you understand the biophysics, you can make people better. That includes the worst cases you ever could imagine. And what am I getting ready to do on the blogs is tell you exactly where and how these diseases can be affected. Right now, we're focusing on the elephant in the room, because the elephant in the room is all these young, fit people dying
Yep.
turbo cancers and dropping dead. We know why they're dropping dead, because of the myocarditis. That one's easy. But what people don't even know is the bigger pulse in the hospital data is actually at the kidney level. Why? Because the kidney membrane is a big deal too. Why? It's also electromagnetic. So that's the reason why you can go from having normal kidneys to, stage 4 kidney failure and be on dialysis if things go wrong for you. It's also the reason why fit people are dying at record rates where fat people aren't. Why? Because remember, the liquid nanoparticles are directed towards the fat, away from your organs. So the skinnier you are, the more chance you have of dying. How do you like that? So when you ask the question, why did Damar Hamlin almost drop dead on national television for the NFL? Now you get the answer. Then the question, J.J. Watt, who's future Hall of Fame player in the NFL, had to retire because what did he develop? Horrible AFib that they couldn't even fix with cardioversion. So he's out. But, you're just going to say, oh, this is just, from football. If you want to know some of the things that are going on in the NHL, same thing. Look at them. People in Europe, fit soccer players dropping dead on the field. Just remember, people that can be controlled and forced into centralized medicine can be made broke very fast, and they can also be controlled through the drugs. The more drugs you take, the more you're controlled. Why? The atoms they need to percolate in your blood and your CSF, because your blood-brain barrier and your gut barrier is open. That makes you more of a targeted individual. They can turn on more systems in your body with the Warburg metabolism. they can force you to be a bacteria in archaea, and you don't realize it. If they push the envelope too much, that's how you get a stage 4 cancer.
Now you've
It's
been
not that
just,
hard. It's not that hard to understand once you understand the initial wiring diagram of that mitochondria. This story right here. This story right here, that's the key.
actually I show the electron transport chain to all my clients, and I just showed it to a client with a GBM, but I think it's almost too little too late, unfortunately.
If you got a GBM, you need to
That's-
take your money out, go enjoy your life.
Yeah.
That's when the electricity is, it's everywhere in your brain.
Yeah. Okay.
You're not fixing that one.
No. So you've been to Suriname. You've been on a huge trip, actually, all the way to Antarctica. It's interesting to follow as you wrote your blogs.
Well,
Through
I
that.
went around there specifically to go to these places that are doing a lot of the high level work. That's what South America was all about.
Okay. Um,
May I ask, since I'm looking at you in El Salvador, and you mentioned the possibility of starting to put in DC current throughout El Salvador, is that going to still be going ahead?
To be honest with you, the same thing I think that's happened with Maha is starting to happen here. The globalists now are getting their teeth into El Salvador. So I really truly don't know what's going to happen here. I think that the people that are really in power, they understand that their game is right now at risk, and they're going to start ramp up everything they possibly can to keep control. Because what's the ultimate plan here? As I told you before, the Rockefeller Rothschild empire in banking, which is really the big source of this problem, is now actively being replaced by DOD and DARPA. So the technocratic machine, which is far more powerful than the money machine, is now being put in place, and it's happening at a very rapid rate, much more rapid than I thought. And I think the reason for that, they did not anticipate that COVID would help guys like me out. Why? Because now we do podcasts like this, and people are very interested in the health side, and they're interested in the things that are happening. And it's very easy to put these parts together. Why? Because all you have to do now is go on Twitter, and you'll know that when I tell you people are dropping dead of heart disease, kidney disease, and there's people on the internet that have that data. And you have Steve Kirsch, you have McCullough, you have Malone, you have Kevin McKiernan, you have Jessica Rose, you have Mary Talley Bowden. Like, this isn't a Jack Kruse story.
mhm.
What Jack Kruse doing? He's distributing the information so that you can see these people. When Bobby Kennedy gets on a plane and he puts a massive amount of methylene blue in his drink, it stimulates a lot of interest. People are like, why is he doing that? What does he know that we don't know? You know, why all of a sudden do we have an outbreak in Texas of MMR, and then he doesn't come out and say anything about the vaccine when his running mate has told the world that her daughter, Echo, got autism right after an MMR vaccine? Why aren't people asking these questions? Well, guess what? They are. And this is the reason why. I think the time scale of the technocrats has been sped up. That's what I think you're seeing going on right now in the United States. This is the reason why when Trump got elected, I thought that Maha had a real chance of truly changing the health of the world. And then I thought that the finance side, that Trump wouldn't do the thing that really needs to be done, which is to get Bitcoin in to replace fiat money. And what's actually happened is he's taken Maha apart piece by piece. And the monetary issue looks like it's going to get through unscathed. I think. Why? Because I think they have a fundamental belief that because the money is fully decentralized, that they can't really screw with it. So what they've decided to do is, if we can control and dumb down the people that'll be using it, we probably don't have to worry about the money.
That's disturbing.
I know it's disturbing, but this is the thing that infuriates me about people. that if you know anything about me for 20 years, has this story not been consistent in just about everything that I've written? Every single piece and part. I've been throwing it out at you. And I say to everybody, ask me questions. I dare you. And you know what the problem is? People are afraid. They think because they're not as wise or as smart as I am, that I'm not going to answer the questions. They're dead wrong. And they've been dead wrong for 20 years. But I'm also going to highlight the dumbasses out there that many times you guys highlight. So when I tell you, don't listen to Huberman, don't listen to Peter Attia, don't listen to Rhonda Patrick, Thomas Siegfried isn't who you need to be listened to. Understand why I'm saying that? Because you never get to the story that I told you today if you buy that bullshit. And do you understand why those stories are amplified by the media? Because that's the goal. You understand why Joe Rogan now is a problem. Why Joe Rogan's never had Kevin McKiernan on or Jack Kruse on or Jessica Rose on. Well, God forbid this shit comes out. You know, who does he put on? Malone and McCullough. Do you think Malone and McCullough have put all this together? No, of course not. You know, the story is out there. And
it's always a biochemistry story, right?
Well, for them it is, but remember, if you're focusing on the biochemistry, can you ever get to the biophysics of what we just talked about here? And the answer is no. And when you really realize truly what all these scientists that I've talked about in this podcast, I'm talking about all the way from Albert St. George to Doug Wallace, all of them. Light is the lever that controls biochemistry. So if you think biochemistry is fundamental, you're an idiot. I'm going to tell you exactly how it goes. Biology is not a fundamental science, and neither is chemistry, but physics is. Those two sciences have to play by the rules of physics. And when you realize that a cell basically is a giant physics lab that's been going on for 3.8 billion years, and it's so far ahead of where we are, it's not even funny. It's amazing what life can really do. And when you understand the basics of how it's powered, it's just stunning. It's stunning to see it for yourself. And then this is the best part of the story. When you really understand it, the solution for regeneration that Becker found is pretty simple. You need UV and IR light in your environment constantly, and you can renovate just about any disease you got. And you should do it when you're grounded. Why? Because when you're grounded to earth, it actually makes the current more efficient. How do you like that? How hard was Jack Kruse 101? But to get you to Jack Kruse 101, yeah, you had to go through a random walk through a lot of siloed science.
Jack, may I just ask a quick question? I'm thinking of a deceased aunt who went through hell during the Depression. She had TB out in Saskatchewan. But even in cold Saskatchewan, which gets pretty cold, they would wheel them out into the sunlight. So, so there's a connect here, right?
Yeah, there is. I mean, here's what you need to know. When you understand we're solid state, you need the surface sunlight, because even in that sunlight, there's red there. What does the red do? It makes the water from all the heme-based proteins. So there's the help there. There's probably not a lot of UV light there, but there is. You know where the UV light comes from? When you put a mammal in cold, it creates UV light from their mitochondrial DNA. You make UV light inside at the biophoton level. So how do we know that? If you know anything about the fat hormone that links everything, it's called leptin. Do you know what the absorption and emission spectra of leptin are? 220. 220 is 220 nanometer light is not made by the sun. So you got to ask yourself that question, like I told you before about Nick Lane's book. If it's a 30 million volt current, how the hell does nature do this? So what did I start doing? I looked at all the key players in biochemistry: leptin, melatonin, cytochrome 1, which is NAD. You know what I found? All of them are made out of aromatic amino acids. So what did I do? I asked, what's the absorption and emission spectra? So at that time, when I started to find out they were all in the deep UV range below what the sun made, I began to realize that there's a story here that we're making light that's more powerful than the sun, and we do it when we're in cold environments. I said, this makes total sense, because this is how we regenerate when we sleep. It's also how we regenerate in cold climates. I said, this makes total sense. So I took that information over a decade ago to one of the most famous biochemists that are out there, Ray Peat, and sat down and tried to explain this to him. And all I got was a glass look eye. Did he change anything? No. And I said, all you have to do to see the world that I'm painting for you in biochemistry is that every single biochemical that you know has an absorption and emission spectra. Do a hard stop and ask yourself, why is that? And guess what? Ray didn't want to do that. You know why? Because it threatened his existence of how he saw the world. The reason why Siegfried doesn't do the things that he needs to do, or Pollock doesn't do the things that he needs to do, is for the same reason. This is all they know. But guess what Uncle Jack did? I was interested. I said, you know what? I want to figure this out. Becker tickled me, and I said, it's time somebody finishes this job.
Mhm.
Thanks for taking on that baton.
Well, we'll see what everybody does with it, because right now, I have to tell you, my position after 20 years, there's not a lot of people out there that really, truly understand truly how we work. And moreover, all they do is complain how hard it seems to be. But it's kind of funny. In about an hour, I've discussed it with you because our friend from Portland happened to ask a good question. He paid attention to that podcast that I did with that girl.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, there's something that he said there. I don't know what he said, but he said something there. It's important. So important that he got up this morning and said, I'm going to listen to it again.
Yeah, it was excellent. I listened to it twice too. Jack,
Nothing else matters. Nothing really else matters once you understand this wiring diagram. Then it's a matter of, okay, how do we tackle this, that, and the other thing? Then that's where it gets interesting, because the recommendations you make requires that the people have done some of the heavy lifting. For example, reading Becker's book and understanding what he really found. I will tell you, there's a lot of amazing things in that book, but everybody seems to forget that one key thing, 1/1,000,000th of 1 amp.
Wow.
It's stunning when you see it. And then you have to ask the question, you got 30 million volts here. How the hell do you get to 1/1,000,000th out of 1 amp in the same system? It almost sounds, from an electrical engineering standpoint, incomprehensible until you ask the third grade questions, which is exactly what I did. And you know what I've been waiting for 20 years? For y'all to do the same thing. And none of you have.
But it's a melanin and a non-native EMF story, right?
Well, I think it's a light, water, and magnetism.
Magnetism, right. Yeah, of course. And you've been saying that forever.
Right.
Right.
But guess what? Nobody's asking how to put it all together. Well, it's all together now.
Mhm.
I mean, you can thank Chantel, you can thank Rick Rubin, and you can thank Huberman, because guess what? That's when we decided, okay, now we're going to let the genie out the bottle. Now the genie's out the bottle. What are you going to do with it? And the key is this should be the biggest story in the world, but it's not. And
Agreed.
the reason why is because the people on the other side, they're trying to take out all the people that you could fact check all this with. Like Dan Weldon getting taken out of the CDC is a huge hit. Bobby being enucleated by the Cali Means of the world. Understand what's really going on in governments. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. In Canada, don't you find it kind of amazing that you get a guy as prime minister to come in who's not even Canadian, who actually ruined the Bank of England, now running Canada? You think you're going to get any answers in Canada? No, that's exactly what they want. They want you scurrying over here so you don't listen to this story about the turbo cancers they gave you.
Hang on, you're saying Trudeau is not Canadian?
No, Mark
Oh,
Carney.
Mark Carney. Sorry. Okay.
Actually, he is, but you wouldn't know it from his career.
Right. That's the point.
Yeah.
The point is, who does he work for? The guys running the Bank of England, the guys that I told you are the big problem. These are the guys, what did they say? You'll own nothing and be happy about it. If that doesn't speak control I don't know what does. It's the same story that DARPA and the United States government are using. But guess what? The United States has technology that goes far past what Europe, Canada, and the World Economic Forum are doing. They're just complicit with the Bill Gates of the world to make sure that this bioweapons program goes everywhere. All they have to do is get those atoms in you by your food, your supplements, your processed food, and they win. They know the game is so rigged, you don't even realize how rigged it is. And they know that each one of you have a wide open blood-brain barrier and gut barrier. So you'll actually help them out. This story is 2,500 years old.
Mhm.
Plato's allegory of the cave. And everybody in Canada is putting their wrists up and say, yeah, put me back in the cuffs. People in Portland doing the same thing. There's very few people awake in the United States. Most of those people actually voted for Trump. But even those people, they're not fully awake because he's only giving you half the story. The part that everybody thought he was going to get, the reason he got elected, this Maha thing was a big deal. Everybody was very interested in that. That's why he got elected. Now guess what's happening? Yep, this is the shell game. We promised you, but no, I'm sorry, we can't give you that. Now we're going to ramp up the technocratic control to show you just how well we can do this. That's what's happening right in front of your eyes, and you don't realize it. That defines power.
Is your biggest worry that we're gonna be Brave New World meets 1984, Jack?
I think Brave New World in 1984 is small potatoes compared to what I'm talking about. This actually is, this is an extinction event of the sixth kind. This is the sixth extinction event. The people that will be left will be the chosen. That's it. And ultimately, this is going to come down to those people having to fight the 70 to 100,000 savages that I'm trying to create. That's what I think is going to happen. The rest of you, you are just dead soldiers on a battlefield. Some of you are already dead and don't even know enough to lay down. But that's the truth. The more compliant you are with their plan, this is the reason why I don't have time to talk to everybody. When I get the sense that you're part of the problem, I just turn the radio station off. I'm not interested. I don't have enough time to convince you that I'm right. I already know that I'm right. Why? Because everything that I've told you today is based on the laws of physics. It's not subject to a randomized controlled clinical trial. Okay, light here works as it does in Jupiter, Andromeda, and any other galaxy you want to know. The problem is it's not my fault that you didn't learn anything about the laws of electromagnetism or the laws of chemistry. That's not my problem. That's your problem. I'm trying to focus down on the things you know so that you can understand truly what's happening to its scale now. This is no longer, the reason the United States government is no longer focused on Europe, no longer focused in Central America, it's focused on the people here. We are the last soldiers standing. The American savages are the last group of people they have to take out till they do everything in their power. They're going to make sure that that founding document is rendered useless. That's their goal. And we have one thing left. That's it. Second Amendment. It's about time people start realizing it very quickly and be ready because the day is coming and it's coming a lot faster than everybody thinks. That's where I think it ends. We may not even have enough time to wait for the next Carrington event.
Ooh, depressing.
Well, I mean, you can
And
say depressing. I look at it
As a
actually pretty good. I think people looked at the American Revolution pretty good. I think people looked at VE Day pretty good. See, that's what I'm saying. When you say it's depressing, that tells me you're more of the problem than the solution. For me, no, I think it's actually liberating because guess what? You can't fix a problem until you're aware of the problem.
Right.
and
That's why I always tell you, wounds create your wisdom. Embrace the suck. Because what did Becker tell us? You can't get regeneration without the injury.
Mhm.
If I may, on that theme, and at this point, coming through COVID, in many ways, it was a wake-up call. It was a blessing because we were the
Guinea
You were the
pigs?
target. Say it. You were the target. That's the right
yeah,
word.
and you know, we have awakened. I mean, the fact that when I look at my own life, and I'm sure we're all the same way. You mentioned it earlier, Jack. You know, they thought they were going to get away with it, and here we are on Zooms, and um, at I've been on Zooms in which I've connected to all corners of the world. I mean, it's just amazing. So
Well, guess
I,
what?
I
That's the whole point. This is the story that needs, just like I told you, molecular resonance works. That antenna needs to keep going out. If you don't think that I knew where this was going to end 2 years ago, this is exactly the same call that happened to Becker on 60 Minutes in 1977. If you don't think I'm aware of that, then you don't understand Jack Kruse.
Mhm.
Now it's your job
Yeah.
to make your antennas go. So when you want to have people on and they want to talk about bullshit, you say, you know what? Let's talk about this. You know, you did it. I will tell you, you're the interesting cat here for me. The lady that missed, that's quantum entanglement. Why? She wasn't the right person to be here. You were. Why? Because you got up and you saw something in that podcast that I said that hit you. It hit you in a way that you didn't expect. And so much so that you said, okay, I'm going to ask him this question. You thought we're going to go this route. I'm going to ask this. Look what you opened up. That defines the electromagnetic force. That defines quantum entanglement. That defines nonlinear optics. Small stimulus leads to a massive amplification. Guess what? That's the story that needs to get out there. So when you talk to somebody in the future and they want to talk to you about carbohydrates or a supplement, no, you're wasting our time. You're wasting airwaves. We all have to be on the same program. The program is we need to end the messenger RNA platform. We need to get people in the sun because it's got to have UV and IR. Why? Because Becker told us that's how we regenerate. That's all that matters. And when you do that, make sure you're grounded physically to the ground, not over power lines, but grounded. And eat like a great white shark when you're doing this, because if you eat the carbohydrates, you're going to make the Warburg metabolism worse. Not because food matters, because we don't want you to die sooner than later. If we're creating savages, we got to make sure you have more time on Earth, which scales what? To that little girl story that I told you at 16 years old, doesn't it? Give me more time to work in her brain to save her life, doesn't it? What the hell do you think I'm telling you guys right now? The exact same thing, but you don't realize it. So the more you focus in on the wrong things, the less times I'm going to come back and talk to you. And trust me, I pay attention.
Jack, I gotta say, you helped me this last year. I broke my leg, my tibial plateau, and your voice was in my head. So I did cold therapy like crazy, tried to minimize all the drugs using the cold, like reading your chapter in Epi-Paleo Rx, which was amazing. And just moved outside, you know, not 24 hours a day, but from sunset to sunrise to sunset. And yeah, I just want to thank you personally for teaching us how to heal. I think it
Telling
helped.
people to do it. That's all you got to do. You have to realize there's a program in you that works high and low latitude. It's probably safer right now because of all the things going on. That regeneration will happen quicker inside the tropics. Just
Right.
because most of the stuff that DARPA is being done is in population centers, which is higher latitude, which is the reason why you don't want to go there. That's the main issue. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's more difficult to do
Mhm.
when you realize the basics here of what Becker taught us. If you are sick, understand what Becker told us about regeneration. Think about that little 3-year-old's fingertips.
Mhm.
No matter what your problem is,
Yeah.
you can do it too, because he proved that we have the ability as the most complex mammal on the planet to do exactly what salamanders do.
Phenomenal. Well, Jack, we'd love to ask you our signature question, which is, what does quantum healthy mean to you?
It means destroying all the chronic disease epidemics the right way and not the wrong way.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
Anything else you'd like to add? Anything that
Nope.
we missed? Okay. How can people reach you, Jack?
Probably the best way, on Twitter. If you follow my tweets, I'll blow your mind. There's one out there today that really will blow your mind. It tells you how haplotypes evolved in humans
Okay.
and why it's important to this story. And you follow me at Dr. Jack Kruse pretty much everywhere on social media. If you go to my website, jackkruse.com, there's a form there. You sign up. There's probably 10 years worth of reading for you to read there on just about all different kinds of diseases tied to this wiring diagram that I told to you today. And then if you decide you want to do Jack Kruse DIY, you go to Patreon. That's where I teach you the science.
Right.
You decide you want more of my time, you become a member. Probably the best way to do this gold membership. That way you get to spend more time with me, ask me questions. You can book consults with me. You can talk to me. Then the last level is if you make me your doctor. It's quite expensive these days. But yeah, I have patients that I take on one-on-one, and I will go down to the brass tacks to tell you exactly what's going on with you.
Okay. I'd love to thank you for your time and sharing your Ferrari with the world rather than choosing golf, which you could have in your retirement, and just continually sharing all your insights to help humanity survive this potentially this extinction event, as we've heard today. And really just
I don't know if the T-Rexes right now, the modern T-Rexes, are smart enough to say themselves, but they better get used to hearing it because it's the truth.
a modern T-Rex. Yeah, and
That's
it's
what the little T-Rex is behind me. I can hear him flapping in the pool. That's the bird, the theropod dinosaurs. That's the reason why I've got birds everywhere. You can see them right over there. You see a little black bird at the edge of the pool?
Mhm.
yeah.
That black bird comes here almost every day because he knows what he means to me with his melanin sheet out here. He comes to take a bath all the time because I can hear him flapping his wings. He's letting me know that T-Rex there, that's what happens after asteroid changes light in your environment. You turn to a bird. So the question you have to ask yourself about what we talked about today, what are we going to turn into with our extinction event?
Unless we can wake up enough blue lit, tech addicted people to change their lives quickly, right?
Absolutely correct. And do I have a lot of optimism that I probably had 3 or 4 months ago? No. Why? Because I thought this pathway was going to be opened by Trump and Bobby. And I realized that all it is a tunnel that's had rock thrown on the front and the back side of the tunnel. So that means we have to do it. We have to be the savages to get the message.
Yeah.
That's the reason why podcasts and asking the right questions are important. And I would also tell you, when you have the wrong people on, your duty as the podcaster is to actually out them.
Mm-hmm.
Say, well, if this is what you believe, can we talk about this? Can you explain that? And if they say to you, well, I don't know anything about this. Well, if you don't, then why do you think that this is the real answer? Like, if you don't do that,
Mm-hmm.
remember, your job in your audience is to wake up to sleeping. So remember what I always tell you. Not a lot of people like it, especially Canadians, because you're way too nice. Punch in the mouth. That's what everybody needs. Because guess what? The injury is what creates the regeneration. And the thing is, that's how you get people thinking. Say, I never thought about this in that way. And when you do, then you have a chance to truly wake up someone who's really in their own Dunning-Kruger moment, when they don't know what they don't know. And it turns out what they don't know is the single most important part of the story. That's what I tried to tell your friend from Portland. 1/1,000,000,000 of one amp. That's the single most important thing in that book. You want to know the truth. And I guarantee it, there's a lot of amazing things in that book. Everybody seems to have missed that key. Some of us didn't. Now we're highlighting why it's the most important part, because it's the answer, the prescription to what's really going on.
Dr. Alexis Cowan said, pain makes you awake. And I feel like, your wound, the wound, the wisdom comes from the wounds that you said today.
If you listened to the podcast that he was talking about earlier, what did I say when a woman,
The Dharma,
the pain at birth, that pain is actually what stimulates her body.
the vasopressin.
Well, guess what happens? We give her an epidural. What did we just do? Like, there's nothing that we do in the modern world that really is based on quantum biology or the decentralized networks that's thermodynamics that nature operates on. We're trying to make everything great for people. Parents are trying to make friends with their kids. They're trying to give them all trophies. This is all bullshit. Absolute bullshit. And it's about time people realize, how much layers of the bullshit there, the climate scam, the transgender scam, all of this, it's all bullshit designed to control us. And the thing is, until you're willing to punch people in the mouth and bring these hard topics up, you're not going to solve anything. All you're going to do is keep going down the path. And those are not the people I'm interested in. I'm interested in the people that are going to change things. That's who I'm interested in. That's why I'm done with all the politicians. They all told me, yes, we want your help. I gave them the help. All of them have my constitutional medical freedom law. Guess what? None of them can pass it. Why? Because basically it ties big pharma, it ties technology in a knot. So what does that tell you? That every politician on the planet is also bought. So guess what that means? It's up to us. We got to do it. I'm ready. You?
Yeah.
Let's go. You live in Canada. They took your guns away. Lots of luck. Forget about Australia. People in his state are trying to get rid of the Second Amendment. After hearing this podcast, you think that's such a great idea? Because remember why that Second Amendment was put there. So when the government does things to us they're not supposed to do, we have a way to say, sorry, King George, that's not the way this is going to go. Today it's, sorry, Donald Trump. Sorry, Joe Biden. Sorry, Congress. Sorry, Supreme Court. Got it? That's where we're at. They have pushed us all the way to that event. So pardon me if I could care less what happens in Europe, could care less what happens in Africa, could care less what happens in Canada. Why? I don't think that's where the message is resonating right now. Because if it was, they wouldn't be talking about the shit they're talking about. The Messenger RNA platform is the biggest story, and everybody better start focusing in on it. Because if you don't, then you really don't understand what's really going on. It's got to go. That's the first step in taking apart this whole program.
That was really clear in your podcast with Mary Bowden. That was Danny Jones, right?
Yep. That's the message that I tried to get to everybody at the end of December about Callie. And I try to tell everybody that, look, Callie trained at 3 places that all have huge links to the DOD and DARPA. But did anybody ask? You saw how even Danny pushed back. And you saw how hard I pushed. You saw the things that I said about his mother, the polio vaccine, that he didn't even know what was on his own mother's death certificate. Okay, that's what a savage does. I want to out people who are not part of the solution.
You're not everybody's cup of tea, right?
No. Guess what? You can't amplify people what you're basically doing right now, if you're not talking about this, you are like that person 65 million years ago, hey, say that rock was only 6 miles. Can you send us a couple more that are even bigger? Because that's effectively what you're doing, whether you know it or not. That's how I look at it, because I understand the game that's being played.
Mhm.
So I have no time for people that can't think. And this is all first principle thinking. That is decentralized thinking. When you run a Warburg metabolism in the brain, you become incapable of first principle thinking. And they know that. And that's what they're using. That's why elections every time since JFK have been cooked. That's the way they're being cooked. All right, guys. It was good talking to you. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Share
This,
it. Put it
this has
out.
been, Jack, this has been amazing, really. Thank you.
No
Thank you.
problem. Take
Thanks
care.
for all your wisdom.
No problem. Bye-bye.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Cheers.
Thank you for sticking around to the end of this podcast. We want to thank our sponsor, Viva Rays, who allows for us to get this information to you. They offer top of the line blue blocking glasses, which, as we know, are critical for our health these days for blocking artificial light at night. Over 90% of our time is spent indoors under artificial lights, and this puts us all prone to circadian rhythm disruption. You can use the code Quantum Healthy for a discount. Link is in the show notes.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Endia at endiaray.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.